Mic check, mic check. I don't know if y'all can hear me. Check, mic check. So y'all. All right, y'all. It looks like y'all can hear me. It might be a little muffled, but we got this video we want y'all to check out. We want to learn a little bit more about Donald Trump, and this is just we just gonna learn. We gotta learn. We gotta learn about who our president is. All right, so take it for what it is. If you want to hate, that's what you do. But let's watch this, y'all. Check it out.
And you, every one of you sitting in this room, Donald Trump is all about money. And you, every one of you sitting in this room, you either recognized his greatness and bask in it and glory in it, or Donald has a word for you. Loser. Donald is a man who's publicly humiliated the mother of his children, who you'll read in my book made up stories that beautiful women, Kim Basinger, Madonna, Carla Bruni, were pounding on his bedroom door because, after all, every woman in America has got to have Donald. By the way, not only did none of these women want to notch their lipstick case, two of them had never met him, apparently, and the third one had a brief conversation with him and refers to him as the king of sleaze. Now, Donald has spent his entire life doing business with con artists, with mafia, with Russian mobsters, with swindlers. His entire life. Not surprisingly, since his father, Fred Trump, a very industrious guy who also was a profiteer on post-World War II housing projects, had a business partner, Willie Tomasello, who, according to law enforcement reports and the New York State Organized Crime Task Force, was an associate and a front for the Gambino and Genovese organized crime families. So, Donald, not unsurprisingly, after graduating from college, where, he keeps saying nobody's ever seen President Obama when he went to Columbia. Like, the women who've been interviewed about the dates they went on with him and the people who played basketball with him. None of those people apparently exist to Donald. Hardly anybody saw him at Penn, although I did interview Candace Bergen, who told me that they did go on a date, which, as she put it, ended early. But when Donald got to New York, he made a beeline to the notorious Roy Cohn, Senator Joe McCarthy's attack dog. And that relationship helped him. He regarded Roy Cohn as a second father and as a mentor, and he said in writing that he loved Roy Cohn because Roy would brutalize for you. Roy would brutalize for you. So that leads me to this story I want to tell you about what happened when Donald's father, Fred, died. Fred was a really industrious guy. I mean, he had a little business at the age of 15. So did I. And when he died, 2 days or 3 days after his funeral, a new great-grandchild was born. A descendant in the line of Freddie Trump Jr., who had died early. He was an alcoholic and did not have a happy life. And this child immediately became ill, desperately ill, stopped breathing twice, needed terrifically expensive medical care. Now, like many family-owned businesses, the Trumps provide everyone in the family with health care. And Donald is a big believer, it's one of the best things about Donald, in universal health care. Well, Robert Trump wrote a letter to the company's insurance administrator, Precise, and said, whatever the bills are, just pay them. Don't ask questions, just pay the bills to take care of this child. And then Fred Trump's will was read. And it turned out that instead of dividing his pie 5 ways, it was divided 4. The line of the late Freddie Trump Jr. was cut out of the will, except for some minor gifts. Surprise, surprise, that line of the family went to court arguing undue influence.
Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. Well, I'm hoping that you're doing great from wherever you're watching me from. As you know, I'm your host and presenter Chintok Stories. Well, I'm hoping that you're doing fine.
That although Fred Trump had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 1.5 or 2 years after he wrote his last will, they argued that some influence had been applied on him to cut them out of the will. The reaction to this by Donald Trump was that he immediately cut off all health care for this child. I want you to think about this. Donald Trump, over money, put the life of a sickly infant in jeopardy, his own blood, over money. And when he was asked about this, he said, well, what else can I do? Well, don't you think this would look cold-hearted? And Donald's answer is essentially, well, you know, I don't like people who sue my father's estate. No compassion for the child any more than there was no compassion for the Khan family whose son is a serving American military officer killed in combat. No empathy for another person, because other people to Donald are simply objects to be used. Now, I want to contrast what happened with this sickly child. A judge ordered that the health care continue. There was some kind of negotiated settlement. And as Donald does with negotiated settlements all the time, and by the way, contrary to his statement, he never settles, he settles all the time. The condition of settling was they had to seal the record. So we don't know exactly what was done for this child. Well, Donald was confronted with the issue of mercy a few years earlier. So as I tell you this, keep in mind that Donald had no mercy for his own grandnephew. Donald had a famous helicopter. In the 80s, you may have seen him flying around in it and getting pictures of it, called the Ivana. It's a Euro supercopter. And then he had a fleet of helicopters to run high rollers down to Atlantic City and back. And these copters were provided and managed by a guy named Joe Wexelbaum, a convicted felon, an associate of mob families. There were lots of companies that had helicopters. There were better financed companies than this one, but this is who Donald chose. It turns out Joe Wexelbaum had a second business. He was a major drug trafficker. He ran a drug ring that got cocaine and marijuana from Colombia. They picked it up in Miami. According to the court papers, Joe Wexelbaum personally handled the drugs. He sometimes helped load them into the cars. He would give the drivers money or plane tickets or whatever they needed to go on. And they would go up to Cincinnati and areas near there. He was indicted in the fall of 1985. Now, when you own a casino, you have a privilege. The Supreme Court, and those of you who read my book, Temples of Chance, know that casinos are not a right, they are a privilege. Therefore, the state can impose virtually any rule it wants on you. And the state of New Jersey said you must prove by clear and convincing evidence that you can pay your bills on time, that you are morally fit, and that you do not associate with criminals. Well, Donald didn't get rid of Joe Wexelbaum's helicopter company at this point. Joe Wexelbaum then agreed to plead guilty. The DEA had him cold. And he asked that his case be moved either to Miami, where the drugs began and he had a home, or New York City, where he lived. The case instead was moved to New Jersey, which neither the prosecutors nor the defense lawyer have ever been able to explain. And it came before, out of the more than 800 district court judges in America, Judge Marianne Trump Berry, his sister. Now, Judge Berry is required to recuse herself from this case, and she did about 3 weeks later. But just think about the conversation that went on here. She goes to the chief judge and says, you know, I can't handle this case with this big drug trafficker because my husband, who's a lawyer for my brother's casinos, he flies in those helicopters all the time, and I fly in those helicopters, and you're the chief judge saying I got a federal judge flying around in a drug trafficker's helicopters. Potential here for real embarrassing things to happen for the federal judiciary. Donald, meanwhile, shows his mercy to this man. He writes a letter pleading for him to get a short sentence, calling him diligent, saying basically he's a stand-up guy, you know, who should be treated lightly by the courts. When the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement goes to ask Donald about the letter, he says, I don't know what you're talking about. You could construe that as a cover-up, certainly as lying. So they go back and get the letter that they didn't have. They show him the letter, and Donald says, yeah, that's my signature. End of inquiry. Not, why are you doing business with this guy? Why did you do business with this guy? What other business relationship did you have with him? What's going on here? They did ask a few questions about, and you'll read in the book, an apartment that Joe Wexelbaum and his brother rented under rather unusual circumstances, an apartment in a different building than Trump Tower, but that was owned personally by Donald Trump. Well, Joey Wexelbaum comes up for sentencing before the new judge. He gets a very light sentence, and 18 months after he walks into prison, he walks out. He also says he has no money, he can't pay his fines. By the way, the people who drove the drugs, the little fish, 20 years. Up to 20 years. So Donald's letter seeking mercy worked. This big drug guy, he got a light sentence. Now think about that not only in the context of his not showing mercy, but rather brutality toward this sickly child who's helpless. But in terms of all of Donald's attacks about murders and rapists and drugs and, in the black communities of America, he basically has said nobody has a job and everybody has crime and no one has an education. Think about those in the context of that. By the way, when Joe Wexelbaum came out, he said he didn't have money to pay the fines that he owed that were imposed by the court, but he did move into a $2.4 million apartment in Trump Tower. Now, all throughout his career, Donald Trump has been the subject of lawsuits. He cheated employees, he's cheated vendors, he has been accused of swindling investors in projects that his name was on. He's settled many of these cases and had them sealed, so we don't know exactly what happened, but we have his testimony in many of these cases. And his testimony is generally one of two categories. I had no idea. Or, well, you were lucky if you invested in this that the project failed when it did. You could have put all your money into the project and you'd have lost more money. That's his approach to these things. Donald, when it comes to these deals, also often pleads that he doesn't know things. And you'll see some answers that he gives to questions presented to him under oath where his answers are gibberish. I don't know what else to call them. You may have watched in December the Republican debate. And in that debate, Hugh Hewitt, very smart right-wing radio talk show host and a lawyer, he represents companies in environmental deals. He's on the protect the company's interest side. And he asked Donald Trump, what's your priority among the nuclear triad? And Donald Trump's answer, which I quote in full, was gibberish. I don't know what else to call it. And Hugh Hewitt asked the question a second time. And Donald says, oh, nuclear, that's like it's so massive and impressive. It's like it's a big deal. And Hugh Hewitt says, Senator Rubio, same question. Well, let me first, Hugh, tell the American people what the nuclear triad is if they don't know. It is the ability of the United States military to deliver nuclear weapons from submarine-based missiles, land-based missiles, or bombers. When you got to be schooled by Marco Rubio, you don't know much. But here's the thing that my wife and I were watching that debate, and I said that should be the lead item in the coverage of the debate tomorrow by everybody. That this is this most crucial matter of your finger on the button, and Donald doesn't know anything. And I said, however, my guess is it'll get minimal mention. Well, actually, a lot of the stories didn't even mention it. They completely missed it because politics reporters cover the horse race. They don't cover policy. They don't know what the nuclear triad is, nor did they know the significance of this question. But here's what turns out people didn't know that's in my book. Hugh Hewitt asked the exact same question 4 months earlier on his radio show. So Donald had 4 months to get schooled on this. And I ran into Hugh here in Washington a couple of weeks ago. Never met him before. And he didn't know about my book. And I told him the story. And he says, yeah. He said, boy, he had 4 months to get ready for that, didn't he? And he didn't do a thing. Donald doesn't know anything. All you have to do is actually step back and listen to what he says. I'm going to tell Nabisco and Ford they can't build a factory in Mexico. It's not within the powers of the President of the United States to go around telling corporations where they're going to spend their money. And where are the principled conservatives on this issue? Can you imagine if President Barack Obama came out and said that? Donald Trump, through his companies, owes millions and millions and millions of dollars to the Communist Chinese Bank of China, which is essentially controlled at the end of the day by the 9 thugs who lead the government in Beijing. Can you imagine what would happen if Hillary Clinton, it turned out, had a credit card from the Bank of China? Donald Trump has received millions and millions of dollars from Russian oligarchs. One of his sons has said, oh yeah, they're one of the biggest sources of money that we have. I don't know how many of you saw, but there was a really terrific, well-done story in the New York Times a few days ago about all the people who are enemies of Putin, either oligarchs or journalists, who've been murdered. And down in the story was this little line that the Duma had passed a law so that Putin could kill people outside the country. Now, we've killed a few Americans outside the country, but they're people who've declared themselves enemies of the state. And you can argue whether that's right or wrong, but look at what Putin's doing. They're poisoning people and poisoning innocent people in some cases, having people shot. If you're an oligarch in Russia, you're either a friend of Vladimir Putin, or you're in jail, or you're living in fear and trying to get out of the country. Donald Trump keeps advancing Vladimir Putin's objective: weaken or destroy NATO. Imagine what would have happened if we had had George W. Bush saying, hey, you know, we should just weaken NATO. The trouble he would be in over this. The most important thing, and the reason I wrote this book, is that Donald Trump is a master at a couple of things. He is a master at setting up business deals in which he puts up no money. He never had a dollar invested in Atlantic City. And extracting money from these deals. That's why his Atlantic City casino business was among the first to fail. There are profitable, successful casinos in Atlantic City right now today. But Trump's name will disappear on October 10th from the last casino because he had badly run places, and instead of investing in the business and growing the business and doing what, and I'm somebody who has co-founded a little business, we reinvest in the business so it keeps growing to create wealth. Donald Trump, pull money out as fast as you can. Pay no attention to the welfare of the business. Just get cash. When Donald Trump filed bankruptcy and stiffed all these contractors, some of whom their businesses failed, many of whom for years struggled to keep the doors open because they felt an obligation to their employees, Donald demanded big, huge fees be paid to him during the bankruptcy, or he would tie them up in litigation. And so they paid him. Until in the 4th bankruptcy, they paid him to go away. Donald is the most masterful manipulator of the conventions of journalism I have ever seen. Donald understands, first of all, that most journalists are very good at accurately quoting people and accurately getting other sides of the story and quoting them, but have no deep understanding of what's going on. And he exploits that. He knows that the tabloids, especially Rupert Murdoch's New York Post, have no real regard for any set of facts. They'll take a good story any day of the week. So he plants a story that his longtime mistress, whom I knew about long before anybody wrote about her, but I didn't regard it as a story. Billionaire has mistress. No, plane takes off in Washington, lands in LA. Not a story in either case. He plants this story with a big picture of his smiling face on the cover of the Post. Best sex ever. Marla Maples, by the way, as you'll read in the book, has disclaimed that statement. She didn't make it. He creates this image of himself as this Midas. It's all a fraud. It is a fraud. There's nothing there. And I know some of you are going to want to ask, how much is he worth? And I'm going to tell you, I don't know, but I know he's not worth, as he said in a matter of days last year, 8.7 billion, 10 billion, more than 10 billion, 11 billion. What I do know is what Donald said under oath when he had to answer questions about how much are you worth. And he said, well, it depends on my emotional state. And the lawyer goes, excuse me, the lawyer who is now the head of enforcement at the SEC, And he asks a little further, and Donald says, well, yeah, I mean, it depends on how I'm feeling that day. That's, what's happening in the world and how my mood is. That's how I determine my net worth. Now, if this guy wasn't running for president of the United States, I think we'd all agree that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. That is nobody does it that way. And throughout his life, Donald has gotten away with this because almost nobody challenges him. Wayne Barrett, probably the best reporter who ever worked in New York City, who got onto Donald very early on and wrote about him at length in the Village Voice, and who, despite working at the Village Voice, had the most extraordinary law enforcement sources of any reporter I've ever known. And I, and a guy named Neil Barsky at the Wall Street Journal, until Donald pulled a trick on him and he got fired, we're basically the only people really examining Donald. Everybody else, he was a good story. What are you going to go do a bunch of work for? Donald said this thing, and it's a good story. And we would say, yeah, well, let's go look up the records. And we would question what was going on. So before we go to questions, I want to get across to you that the person you have seen, the image created by Donald Trump with the complicity of our major national news organizations, who are utterly failing in their duty with a few notable exceptions. The Washington Post has tried pretty hard. One TV reporter, Katie Tur, has at least asked the tough follow-up questions on him. By and large, Donald Trump has gotten from the press what he wants, to create this image that he is the modern Midas, that, as he said, I alone can save you. That's not the statement of a leader of a free people in a democracy. That's the statement of a would-be dictator. He has said, I love the blacks. And you would think most journalists, even white journalists, would have enough sense to say, boy, that's an interesting way to phrase that statement. And they might want to go look up the times that Donald has been found to have engaged in discrimination against blacks and women and Asians. Found to have done so, been fined for it. They're not doing that. Why is he on all the time? Why has he gotten what by the last measure I saw, was more than $4 billion of free media? Because he's like a train wreck. People won't turn away from the TV. Fox News has put out the story that when they turned off Donald, people turn off their TVs or go to another channel. This is no way to run a democracy. This is serious business. And unlike Donald Trump, who can say in his TV show something totally contrary to sound business practice, and I say this as somebody who, I teach graduate business students and law students part-time, you're fired. He can't fire the dictator in North Korea. He can't fire the Speaker of the House. He can't fire a federal judge who issues an order he doesn't like. Donald Trump tells you he has this sort of vague plan. He's going to build a wall. He's going to get the trillions of dollars, or certainly many hundreds of billions of dollars needed, however he does it, because he's changed slightly now, to round up people in the country illegally. Not the people, by the way, I describe in my book who worked for him and who he cheated out of their wages, but round them up. And other things he's discussed, that he can't do it unless Congress passes legislation allowing him to do that and providing the money. Have you ever heard of a president of the United States picking a fight with the Speaker of the House and then appointing to run his campaign a guy like Steve Bannon, who says at Breitbart that Paul Ryan is a double agent for Hillary Clinton? This is craziness. So I want to take questions from you. I hope that you will read the book. It's a quick read because it's written in news style. There are 44 pages of notes at the end so that you can look up stuff if you don't believe me. My personal email is in the book, and a few people have gotten a hold of me in case people have questions about what material comes from. And I will just leave you with this last point. When I was 18 years old, the San Jose Mercury recruited me to be a reporter, and they hired me at 19. And throughout my career, I have broken stories where people told the editors at the Mercury and at the LA Times and at the New York Times, that's just crazy, that can't be. When I said that the police chief in LA was assigning officers to sleep with women to get political information, that can't be. that they were committing crimes and started a riot. Can't be. Had officers undercover in Moscow and Havana. Subsequent events, it all came out to be true. The police chief, in fact, himself bragged in his autobiography that LAPD had undercover officers in Moscow and Havana. And in 50 years at this, where I've accused people of murder, Jack Welch gave up his retirement perks, the head of Ernst & Young lost his job, President Bush made his only tax policy change, the Clintons changed how they filed their personal tax returns. Every bit of the work has held up. It's been scrutinized all over the place, and it's held up. And in this book, you're going to find stuff that will hold up, and I only wish I'd had 5 weeks to do the book, because there's a whole much more I wanted to put in there. Thank you. So the microphone is over here. And the only thing I'd ask you to do is, if you're going to come up to the microphone, ask a question. Think about what you want to do and ask the question, because a bunch of people are going to want to ask questions, and I want to do as many as we can.
You make a very persuasive case, completely persuasive. Why has the Republican Party allowed Donald Trump to be where he is today?
Because Donald got the votes. I mean, it's as simple as that. But what you're seeing on a broader scale is parties are not important anymore. What's important, and Citizens United really hammered this home, is it's the people who are financing the campaigns, these very narrow groups of people in the country who are financing campaigns. Parties don't have discipline. When the German TV interviewed me, and I haven't been on ABC, NBC, or CBS. I've been on all these national shows in Australia and Canada and Germany and France about the book. One of the correspondents said to me, you know, if a minor backbencher said just a few of the things Donald said, the party would discipline this person. If that didn't work, they would get him out of there. Party has no power here. And so that's what's happening. And I think you're going to see a major realignment. I mean, I've said in the past, this may be the end of the Republican Party as we know it, the way the Whigs went away in 1856. But they're going to have a major realignment. And those Republicans who have not separated themselves from Donald Trump, Glenn Beck said the same thing last night on Lawrence O'Donnell that I've been saying. I don't know how you get the stench off after the election. It's like permanent skunk juice.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, please. Sir.
Two quick questions. There is a book that came out, 6 months ago that was a political biography. I'm sorry, a political campaign biography by Trump. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of it.
Yeah, I've got all of Donald's books and I've read them.
Yeah, you must have it.
It was originally called Crippled America, but he's retitled it.
Yes, I think it's retitled. In any case.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. Well, I'm hoping that you're doing super great, super fine.